Welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. I'm Dan Thomas, joined by Frank Leboeuf here in the studio. Well, the party moved from Munich to Paris over the last 24 hours as hundreds of thousands of fans lined the streets of the French capital to celebrate their first Champions League title. Frank, you did this, of course, back. Frank Very was very keen to tell me before we went on there was millions that lined the Champs-Élysées when you won it, and there's only a few people here today.
Yeah, disappointing. No, it's a different era, and we didn't need any securities, blah blah blah. But yeah, it's very nice to see that, to see the Parisian players being celebrated. So it's great. It's great.
For more, let's welcome in, shall we? Naina Manua is very much our neutral contributor today, as we welcome Gab Marcotti and Julien Laurent. Jules, you were telling us off air this was much better than even your wedding day.
Yeah, and the birth of the kids as well. Greatest day in my history, in my family history, in all of Paris history.
Jules, it's incredible. Obviously, the margin of the win is something that you could never even dream of. When did you start to think, wow, we're not going to muck this one up?
That's a great question. At 3-0, the third goal from Doué, which is a wonderful goal, and where I was sat, on the side where I was sat, after 3, I felt, okay, they've been in Istanbul before and it's still very possible, but PSG was so dominant and Inter was so poor and just could not do anything that I thought, okay, 3 should be okay now. But even at 3, I was still, let's see this, let's not lose the ball, don't give them any wide free kicks, no corners, just nothing. And then the fourth goal, the Kvaratskhelia goal, I almost ran as much as Luis Enrique did on the touchline.
Who was the star of the show for you, Jules?
Doué for sure, because of the 2 goals and the assist. Somebody that never done 3 goals involvement in a Champions League history before in the final. And then to do it at 19, he turns 20 on Tuesday. So to do it, for him to be that good, after not knowing anything about the Champions League 9 months ago and never been playing it before, I think it's exceptional. I love what Dembele did for the team. I know there's 2 assists and one that led to a deflected shot. The one for Kvaratskhelia is beautiful, but at the time of the game where Inter were already in the dressing room and on the plane to Milan, but still they count those 2 assists. I just love the way Dembele pressed and what a leader he was and what he was a guide to follow by the rest of the team, triggering everything. I love Vitinha, who was unplayable, but if you let Vitinha play, he will be unplayable. I love Marquinhos and Pacho. I just love Hakimi too. I love all of them.
Yeah, but if
we were to pick, I know one, I guess, Doué for everything he did in those 66 minutes that he played.
I will go to Gab because I want to talk about Inter in a moment. But just overall, Nadim, how impressed were you with the manner in which PSG won that final?
Yeah, it was amazing to see, to be honest, because I think many of us, we sort of saw this storyline in terms of how good PSG have been in the second half of the Champions League campaign. We thought, well, it's a very experienced Inter side. And from a matchup standpoint, maybe Inter could muck it out and find a way to win 1-0, for example. We just would never have expected it from Inter Milan on a stage this big to be so comprehensively beaten in basically every aspect, from the way that PSG were going man-to-man in their defending at times, to the aggressive press, as Jules has mentioned, from the likes of Dembele, but then to the quality they had. It's 5-0 and it could have been more. Yeah. It's a hugely impressive moment for PSG, but in reality, Inter on the day, they firstly didn't turn up, and secondly, Paris Saint-Germain made sure there was no fight back either. So it's a great, great performance.
Let's welcome Gab Marcotti to the show. We've seen some epic rants from Gab, of course, over the years on the show and the Gab and Jules podcast. So I've been waiting to ask you this question, Gab, for about 24 hours. Where'd it go wrong?
And you have to describe probably the second darkest day in the history of Inter after May 5th, and we don't need to dwell on that. Inter fans know what I'm talking about. So they ran into a team that was just a lot better, and I could tell you that Inter were tired, and that Inzaghi got his substitutions wrong, and so on, and that he didn't have a plan, but he did have a plan. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, to paraphrase Mike Tyson. And what's ironic is those 2 goals. You can see 2 goals in the first 20 minutes when your plan is to go and absorb pressure. Knowing that Paris Saint-Germain starts so fast, we saw them do it against Arsenal, and you can see 2 goals. What I find ironic is you can see those 2 goals precisely by making mistakes at what you're supposed to be good at, right? Because we all said, oh, it's youth and freshness against experience and, been there, done that on the part of Inter. Well, both those goals, the misreading of the run of Doué off the Vitinha pass for the first goal, Barella deciding that, well, my experience tells me that Pacho's not going to get to this ball, which then leads directly to the counterattack, which made it 2-0. You put those two things in there and you see that even your experience, even your decision making, just isn't going for you on the night. At 2-0 down, there was no way they were going to come back into it. And credit to Paris Saint-Germain. Well, we did see a very experienced team out there that was very well positioned on the pitch and made it look easy. And it wasn't Inter. It was the second youngest team by weighted minutes in Europe's Big Five leagues. And that is Paris Saint-Germain, and that is absolutely remarkable.
So how much do you point to the fact that, obviously, we were talking going into the final, Inter had all the experience. When does that experience turn into too old, Gab?
I don't think it's a question of too old. I mean, would it have been better if they could have run more? Sure. But, in the end, you look at those running numbers, Inter ran more than Paris Saint-Germain in this game. Now, they probably ran slower at times, sure, but I don't think that was the issue. I think it was an issue of tactics. It was an issue of quality on the night. It was an issue of decision making on the night, and it was an issue of making mistakes for those for those first two goals. Inter, as you've heard time and again, had almost, I think they'd been behind for something like 32 minutes in the entire Champions League. They're very comfortable when they have the lead, and they can beat you in many different ways when they have the lead. But when you're 2-0 down, when you're in that hole, it becomes a lot tougher. And, you asked Jules what the turning point was. He said the third goal. For me, it was that header that Marcus Thuram put wide, minute 37 of the first half. Had that gone in, then maybe you could see some sort of comeback. You nick a goal and then you try to outlast them. Once that went out, it was obvious to me that this wasn't going to be the night. And I was seated next to the always happy and joyful Mark Ogden. And, he said to me, well, it's a shambles, mate. And then he went and he asked, I think Paris Saint-Germain are going to beat the record for the largest margin of victory, which of course has been 4-0, which has happened on multiple occasions. And sure enough, they did.
What's the narrative in Italy around this defeat, Gab?
So the general sense is that Inter were terrible, but also so much credit is being given to Luis Enrique and Paris Saint-Germain. Nobody is making excuses for Inter. You cannot make excuses. You cannot talk about, the deflected shot and age and being tired and whatever, because, look, they were tired and they'd played a ton of games 2 years ago when they played Manchester City in the final in Istanbul, and that came down to a 1-goal margin and they had the chance to equalize at the end. So it was just layer upon layer of, I don't know what the word is, but because I'm not allowed to say it on television. That is what Inter served up on the night. Simone Inzaghi, of course, after the game, coming out and, he's like, I am so upset. Yeah, only reason I'm here is out of respect for you in the media. And he was asked point blank, when they jet off for the Club World Cup in 10 days' time, will you be on the plane? And he said, I don't know.
Wow.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I'm going to be on the plane.
Because he can't be bothered? Because no one cares about the Club World Cup?
No, I think it's more. They're going to meet on Tuesday. They're going to figure out whether it's appropriate for him to stay, whether they want him to stay. I think the club want to gauge some of the reaction from the fans, and I think he wants to see what the club's plans are. There's also, the ubiquitous offer from Saudi Arabia. I do not see him in Saudi Arabia at all, personally, but who knows? I could be wrong. I've been wrong about many things in the past. So I think it's mostly that. I think Inter wanting to gauge a bit from the fans' reaction. And I think the fans' reaction has been actually, and I'm generalizing here, there's a lot of Inter fans, people have different opinions, is this has been a really, really good season. They achieved so much this year in so many ways. The last game of the season was an absolute car crash. And obviously, yes, they lost the Super Cup and they lost Serie A on the last day of the season and they were knocked out of the Coppa Italia semifinals. But overall, what they achieved this season, I think, was special, given the circumstances, given the hardships. And that shouldn't be wiped away because of one game when you ran into an opponent who did not set a foot wrong all night and were just simply far superior.
But as you say, Gab, in theory, we could be talking about a quadruple winning side. Where did it go wrong in the final weeks of the season?
I think it's a combination of factors. Look, in the end, since we all love talking about margins and what might have been, I will go there. Second to last day of the Serie A season, Inter against Lazio. If Jan Bisek doesn't jump, he doesn't give away that penalty. If Marko Arnautovic doesn't go and have a brain freeze, then Inter score, and we're not having this conversation because they are, at least they became Serie A champions, which obviously was their goal. I think that's the reality of the situation. Games that game they lost to Serie A on really fine margins. They did not lose the Champions League final on fine margins. And for me personally, it would be a serious blow and a serious loss to the club if Simone Inzaghi were to move on.
What's that like, Frank? Like, you must have, of all the highs of your career, you've obviously had lows. Like, we'll talk about Nedum's and many lows in a moment. But like, you look around, you're 2-0 down within 20 minutes, and you know it's only going to go south from there. Yeah. How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? How do you try and combat that as a professional?
The problem is there is your person, your brain, and the brain of the others. Right. And how you match your brain because you think that you can reverse the situation and you want to fight, but what the others are thinking. Some of them, maybe half of them, would say it's over, it's already over. And so you have to make sure that you stick to each other, you talk to each other, and maybe you have the chance. And Gab was talking about the Thuram's chance just before the halftime, and it would have changed. And I say that yesterday, it would have changed something in their head, and maybe on the Paris Saint-Germain players' head as well. But it's complicated. You go and it's like you don't know how to reverse the system, and it's about details. The optimism, but the pessimism is also very fragile.
I bet.
So you have to hold on something very, very thin to make sure you can get something out of it. And yesterday, everything went wrong for them. And everything they tried or decided or changed with the coach substitution never worked. And for Paris Saint-Germain, were the other way around, where they had everything positive and everything working. So it's hard. And but I wouldn't place the age of Inter Milan like saying, oh, you know what, they were old. Acerbi in the 95th minutes in the semi-final decided to run forward and go for the counter-attack and score the goal, who allowed Inter Milan to come back. And he's 36 or 37. So it's not that. They weren't ready. They pass out in that way, and they didn't do what they had to do. And that's hard because as a player, you will never want to talk about that final as an Inter Milan player. You're so ashamed of it.
Nedum, it must be nuts. You look at the clock, only 20 minutes gone, yet you know you're a beaten team.
They wouldn't have necessarily known they're a beaten team at that point, but I think there were certain things going on in the game which would have suggested how uncomfortable and how much doubt would have entered the minds of those players. Because as Luis Enrique said himself, the work rate of Dembele and others, the press that PSG had was so good that those Inter players, probably 15 minutes in, hadn't made probably 20 passes in total, say, individually. And at that point, you're not really in the rhythm of a game. So you say, well, maybe they're just playing it long and they're winning second balls and so on and so forth. But for long periods, they weren't really dominating from that side either. So when you start a game like that and you don't find your rhythm, immediately you're on the back foot. And I think that doubt, you saw it creep in the more the game went on. The prime example, in my opinion, is the Doué first goal, because that comes from them trying to win a corner down one side. Before you know it, Dembele is running down the wing. And Dembele is obviously incredibly two-footed. He can go past people if he wants to. But Inter had a 2v1 in their favour. I believe it was Çalhanoğlu and Acerbi. They had a 2v1, but they were both so reluctant to get to him that they stepped off and allowed him the chance to play the ball in the other direction. If they have the belief, they will be more aggressive. They will dominate that moment and slow him down to a point where their team can get back in. But instead, they've been so passive. And then as soon as that goal goes in, well, what now? That's 2-0, as you've said. And yeah, we've all played in games where things aren't going your way and you want to try and have that spark, saying, come on, boys, come on, boys, come on, boys. But in that moment, well, what does that mean? Does that mean try and get more passes? Because you're still not going to be comfortable. Because Dembele is still going to come flying into you. Well, we'll score from a set piece. You've now watched somebody miss a chance, and this set piece is coming once every 10 minutes. So the doubt is there because they'll put you on the back foot. And the way that PSG play doesn't allow you the chance to have a ton of 1v1 matchups for you to try and find that spark. If it was 2-1 at half time, maybe they go in and they have this sort of belief itself. But to go back to a point which I made earlier as well, from the way that PSG played, there was a press high and there was man-to-man marking. I think it was Vitinha probably never left Barella for the whole 90 minutes. All of a sudden, when you know that you can go in this place to find space, well, the space isn't there anymore because he's right there with you. The game itself, psychologically, physically, everything in that day went well for PSG. And I think for Inter Milan, they're probably still wondering what just happened to them because they've played so many games to this point. But the way that PSG did it, those guys, they've all walked off the pitch. And if they want to talk about good things that they did, you could say, well, they won a few headers. Or, they made a couple of tackles. It's a Champions League final. Did you really show the player that you are? And for Inter, they didn't. But I think a ton of credit deserves to go to PSG for that.
Let's return back to PSG, Jules, because if we still had the big table with regards to that group stage, at Christmas, there were genuine discussions as to whether or not PSG would make it through to the knockout stages, having lost against Bayern, against Atleti, against Arsenal as well. What changed? What was the catalyst that made this PSG side go from struggling to qualify for the knockout stages to the best team in the competition?
I think for me, the turning point is the Man City second half at the Parc des Princes in that game in January where they 2-0 down after 55 minutes and they come back and win 4-2. I saw Vitinha 10 days ago for the media day at the club at PSG, and he said exactly the same. He said it clicked on that night under the pouring rain in Paris. That's where it clicked. And you mentioned that very slow start, disappointing start really, and the Bayern game. They go to Munich that night with a front two of Dembele and Barcola. They play flat 4-4-2 in that game. And it's not me finding excuses on one. They lost that game. Bayern were better. Dembele got sent off just before the hour mark. It's just to show you that back then, in that first half of the season, Luis Enrique is still trying to figure out what's the best way. And we talked a lot on the show about the jigsaw that he put together finally, eventually. But before that, he had the pieces, apart from Kvaratskhelia, I guess. But he had the other pieces. He just had to find the best way of putting those pieces together. And that game against Bayern is a car crash in the sense that it's a flat 4-4-2. Zaire Emery plays in midfield. Barcola in the front two. It's just not working. Doué is nowhere near to be seen, nowhere near a starting position in that team that night. And they get outplayed like they were outplayed 3 weeks earlier at the Emirates against Arsenal, for example. And yet, once he figured out how to play with that team, once they worked on everything Luis Enrique wanted them to work on, phase by phase, the pressing, the counter-pressing, build up from the back, your midfield three, your two wide players, how to isolate Hakimi, what to do with Nuno Mendes, Donnarumma himself. Once all of that was in place, it just needed a bit of spark, just that one spark. And I mean, I would love Nathan forever for that and Manchester City because it happened in that game. The nutmeg of Barcola on Matheus Nunes. For me, it all turned, and I told it to people at the club last night. The nutmeg from Barcola on Matheus Nunes in that PSG Man City game, just after the second goal, that leads to the Dembele first goal, and it goes to 2-1. The Parc des Princes explode. The game changes on that nutmeg and that goal. And after that, there's just no way back. And to be fair to PSG, they haven't looked back since that game.
Nathan?
Yeah, I was going to say, I see Jules' point, and I totally get it in relation to that Man City game. But the Man City side at that moment was the one which was kind of in decline. It's not the one that sort of finished the season. But the moment I think matters most when I look at PSG this season was when they played against Liverpool at home. And by all accounts, they dominated. They deserved to win. But they lose 1-0 with that goal from Harvey Elliott right towards the end of the game. And at that point, Jules would probably say, realistically, the way that we saw PSG throughout the Champions League to this point is a tale of a team that were missing chances. They're losing games that maybe they shouldn't have lost. So what chance did they have going to Anfield in the second leg, or a goal down? And I think the way that they managed to win that game, and obviously it went down to penalties, that's when I thought to myself, this is a side who are capable of going all the way. Because in that moment for Liverpool, it was perhaps the start of, say, this bad 2 weeks that they had. But they were the top team in England, and that was unequivocal. But they just lost at Anfield to a side who'd shown flaws to that point. So yes, I get the City thing and the comeback, and PSG looked incredible in that game, especially in the second half. But I think the character and the maturity to go to Liverpool with a deficit and find a way to win, from there, you can carry so much belief. And I think that carried them all the way through to the final. And then that performance that we saw yesterday.
Gav, it's a very different in Luis Enrique to his Spanish side that bored us to death during the World Cup. You think to that Morocco game where everything was just sideways all of the time. Obviously, he's looked himself in the mirror and addressed the fact that he had to change his tactics.
It bored you. I enjoyed the endless possession personally, but then again, I'm a pure. No, just kidding. Yeah, and look, I mean, I think Jules hit the nail on the head there. Right? You know, there's been a lot of trial and error with this side. Remember, he's the guy who, you know, he got Colomwani for a ton of money and then decided he didn't like him. We heard there the 4-4-2. Doué wasn't getting into the side earlier in the year. Warren Zaire-Emery, who, you know, is a homegrown darling, super popular, you know, eventually decided, right, I don't have a spot for you in the team. We're in the starting 11 anyway. So I think it takes a lot of personality to go and make those changes to get the buy-in. And once he got things clicking, and by the way, and I'm not minimizing this, but, you know, if we're talking January, look, domestically in the league, things were wrapped up very, very early for Paris Saint-Germain. And so essentially his trial or his growth with this unit, with this style of playing, with this balance, this jigsaw that he found, he had to go and test it, you know, where it mattered, against Liverpool, against Arsenal, and in the Champions League final. That says a lot about him. I've been on the record for this. I think the man is a genius. I think he's an extremely unusual person who's obviously had, I mean, he's been through a ton in terms of life experiences, but he is just so unlike almost any other top manager in terms of personality. And but he has this absolute gift of, once he gets buy-in, of riding it to great things. And you know what? He's the second manager in history to have won the treble with two different teams. After Pep Guardiola. And while the first one was an impressive achievement, you know, I'm sure people will go and say, oh, but Messi, maybe one day they'll look back and say, oh, but Doué about this one. But for now, at least, we have to give him credit because he did not inherit somebody else's team. He built this team and its composition and its identity piece by piece. Let's not forget Kvaratskhelia kind of landing in January out of nowhere, integrating him so quickly in a very, very different style of play and a very, very different setup than he had in Napoli. The work that he has put in the last 3-4 months has been close to flawless.
Nadem, let's talk about the other manager, shall we, who's done a treble with two sides, and maybe his inability to adapt.
Well, I mean, that feels like somewhat of a reach, Dan Thomas. How very dare you do that? Because I think when you say an inability to adapt, if you look at the last, say, 4 or 5 years for Man City, they have done things different ways through the years they've been successful. You know, you went through the era where you had a Sergio Aguero and you had two wingers, to them going with a false nine, to them adapting to having like a bigger nine like an Erling Haaland, to going three at the back, to John Stones stepping into midfield. So you could make a case that those little changes have made a difference. Yeah, and I think for Enrique, the adaptations that he's had. Go on. Tell me what you want to say.
I agree with you on the first years, but today, this season was the season where he had to change at some point something, and he didn't. And we were waiting for that. We were waiting for like a Luis Enrique system change. He didn't. I'm sorry. He was stubborn, and he kept his system. Well, you cannot say that. You cannot say no. We saw it.
No, I can.
It didn't work. Well, if you try very slowly and in a small amount.
Okay, the reason I say no isn't because I say fully disagree with what you're saying. The reason I say no is because some of the stuff which he was doing was in relation to how many players that he had unavailable. So there were certain players who were playing, like he finished the season with Mateus Nunes at right back and for a long spell, Nico O'Reilly at left back. You're talking about two attacking midfielders, but those guys were thrust in at a point because no one else was available. I think if he has a full squad available, like most managers wish to have, then you can start to make those tactical tweaks. You know, that's why John Stones, for example, went into midfield. That's why other people went into different positions. And I understand what you're saying.
I'm going to cut you off again. I'm sorry, but you're saying that, in fact, if he had everybody at disposal, he would have changed his football and played more vertical? No, he would have played the same tiki-taka that he used to play, and it never worked anymore.
Listen, Frank. Listen. You can say it never worked anymore. But in reality, when you look back at that period in the season for City, there are tons of reasons as to why things went wrong. But one of them was the fact that they were in an injury crisis like other teams have been. And in that point, they did struggle. I think that in reality, you'll know the exact Man City when they have a full squad available and they're still struggling. That's when there's no spot whatsoever. But for the way that they can adapt, like you probably didn't know this because not many people do. But in those last 20 games of the season, 4 months in the Premier League, City got the most points. That slid under the radar. So surely he adapted something and they found something. Because in that middle third of the season, they were nowhere to be seen, losing 6 games in a row. And I know you don't like that style of football. Tons of people don't. But you're still also talking about one of the teams where consistently year in, year out, they're in the top 2 for goals scored every single season. So clearly there is some sort of end product there. Whether you like the journey or not, it does tend to finish with a lot of goals.
The question that we have had sent in more than any other, Jules, can you guess what it is?
No.
It is about Kylian Mbappe.
That's fair.
Everybody's asked the same question as about whether or not, obviously, PSG could have done that with Mbappe in the side. I'll just remind you, a brilliant documentary, of course, that's out. Luis Enrique talking about Mbappe. This is last season, talking about his admiration of Michael Jordan and how maybe he needs to be inspired by him. I read that you like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan used to grab all his teammates by the balls and defend like a son of a bee. I know you're a god when attacking. There is no one better than you. I know that. But the day you don't attack, you have to be the best player in history defending. That's a leader. That's Michael Jordan. Was it just that Mbappe would not do what we saw, for example, Dembele do yesterday, Jules?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even want to blame Kylian. Kylian is Kylian. He never defended in his whole life, not when he was 5 years old, not when he was 12, not when he was 17, and even less now that he's 25 years old. So I think Luis Enrique tried, and Luis Enrique, make no mistake, would have liked to keep Kylian Mbappe in the team still, because I think he recognized that his goals were so important that you could actually try to build something with him, around him, even if he would not defend. However, once he was gone, then I think Luis Enrique was still very happy in the sense that he could then build exactly what he wanted with the ball and without the ball, with everybody defending then. And we saw Toni Kroos yesterday with a very kind of cryptic message on social media by saying, look, this is what, when you are a team, a proper team, this is what you kind of achieve, really. And you do wonder if that was also a bit of a dig at this Real Madrid team this season that never had this kind of cohesion with the ball and without the ball. And we can make the same point for PSG last season with Kylian in the team. And had Kylian stayed, it would have been the same this season. And maybe they would have still won the Champions League with him because he would have scored 50 goals. And I'm sure Luis Enrique could have found another way without Mbappe defending to do well. But what's true is that the recipes of this success this season is mostly and purely based on a team where everybody attacks and everybody defends and everybody plays together and for each other, which with Kylian in the team would have been 10-1, 1-10, inevitably, because this is what we see everywhere with the national team, with Real Madrid, with PSG before, at Monaco before, at Bondy before, at the Clairefontaine Academy before, all the time. It was 10+1. So we will never know, but we know why PSG are winning this season for sure.
I would have been ready to bet on that, to say that it would have never worked with Kylian Mbappe. I'm very sorry because I highly rank Mbappe and I've a lot defended him in many matters throughout his young career. But as Toni Kroos mentioned, you need a team, you need a spirit, you need a way of sacrificing yourself to the team, which Kylian doesn't do. And I'm sorry, he doesn't defend when he loses the ball. You're the coach. Hey, run 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, bye-bye, out. When you will get it. I swear you will get it. And everybody's going to get it. And Messi was doing the efforts when he was young, when Pep Guardiola said, oh, you lose the ball, you chase it. At least 10 meters. I'm not asking to run back like we saw Dembele or Kvaratskhelia yesterday, but at least 10 meters to show to the others that you are involved in that piece of the jigsaw. That's the problem, and I always mention that having a superstar is a problem because you put the others below at the services of the superstar, and the team doesn't work like that. It never worked. It works if you are legit, like you were Messi because of what he did before at Barcelona, or you are Ronaldo because you showed to the world who you were before, and the coach managed to put the jigsaw around him to make sure that if he doesn't run back, defensively they're strong enough. It didn't never work for Paris Saint-Germain for years. And it worked this season because Kylian wasn't there and everybody was spot on to do the job. And that's the difference. And we have to put that on, I think, to emphasize that.
Nathan?
Yeah, I think what Frank said there is so important. And I think, Jules, as well, the point that he mentioned, like with attackers, do you know when we say they can't defend? I think that's a lie to protect somebody because they can. Like when you go and do training, we're suggesting then that if we do a rondo and that person stays in the middle, they'll be in the middle forever because they can't win the ball back. Well, of course they can, because they make the effort to try and go out. So much of defending at that sort of front level is the effort. You're not expecting them to be able to, make incredible tackles, but just apply a bit of pressure. It's the same like when we train and you do a game of possession. If it's 5v5 and you're trying to move the ball around, like people win the ball back. So when people say, well, I can't do this. Well, of course you can. And as Frank said, it comes down to desire. You have to be teaching these people that this is an important thing to do. Because not least of all, here's the carrot. If you're able to win the ball back up high, the goal is even closer. You can score more goals. But when you then decide, well, it's not for me, everything's harder, all of a sudden, the attacks that come from your team have to come from far deeper. I think we saw yesterday, we've seen this season with Paris Saint-Germain, they really flight you and they make these teams feel uncomfortable with a bunch of players in attack who are not defenders, but they know how to defend situations. Their task is to go and win the ball back. If you're playing in defense, maybe it's to be able to jostle with, with the striker or something, or, don't dive in or try and stop a cross. But when you're in attack, limit the service into the midfield and attack for that opposition. Go and make them uncomfortable. That is it. That's a desire issue. So I think when managers decide to accept that this player is just not going to do it and everything's fine, as Frank said, it's always a 10+1 or it's a 9+2. And at this stage, you find those teams that will always be easy to play against in the grand scheme of things because teams will be able to get in the flow of it. And as we saw yesterday, when everybody defends together and attacks together, you can have moments like where Inter Milan don't know what's happened to them, but they've just been absolutely battered in a cup final and nobody can figure out why. But they just know that the game that they had was one which was never comfortable from the start, and that was because of PSG.
Go on, Gab.
No, I'm not that much of a purist. I think there's also an argument to be made for playing to your strengths. And I'm okay with playing for a superstar who is exceptionally good at one thing. If I come to believe that if I ask Mbappe to chase back and he might lose that 0.1% of sharpness, which means he needs to be, he might be that much slower when the ball comes over the top or whatever, then I might make that decision. But that has got to come from the manager. And I think we saw, to be fair to, and I'm the guy defending Mbappe here, I think we saw at times at Real Madrid this season, we saw that effort when he was asked to go and do more, also because, let's face it, elephant in the room, the guy to the left of him in the Real Madrid attack generally does absolutely nothing at all, even less than Mbappe. I mean, Mbappe becomes Claude Makelele relative to Vinicius, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you have to put that in context too. Sometimes it is by design. And could it have been by design last season with Luis Enrique and Mbappe when, remember, for the whole second half of the season, there was the dispute with the club and he had the unpaid wages and would he stay, would he leave? Was his heart in it to that point? I don't know. Maybe he could have made it work, Luis Enrique, but yeah, I certainly don't blame him for adopting, if you will, the 10+1 last season, and then this season seizing the opportunity to really make it 11v11. And by the way, I'm glad you guys all talked about everybody attacking, because the Italian Champions League winner, Gigio Donnarumma, I think you can all say he worked very, very little in that game. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I believe he touched the ball once.
One save, and I think in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
One save and a couple weird kicks, which kind of, as that often happens, went all over the place, but didn't harm Paris Saint-Germain. So yeah, he was just as important. He attacked too in his own way.
That's good. I was going to crowbar that into the conversation, Gab. Surprisingly, when Luis Enrique was asked who should win the Ballon d'Or, his answer wasn't Donnarumma. Inevitably, it was going to be Dembele, considering what we've seen in this second half. I'd give the Ballon d'Or to Dembele. He defended the attack. The pressing was so good. I think without a shadow of a doubt, it should go to him. I think he was exceptional in this final. Frank's having a breakdown because we're talking about the Ballon d'Or. This, of course, a question that's been asked a lot of Enrique. Jules, who would you vote for?
Ousmane, absolutely. I just think that in 2025, especially, it was a good. We said it on Friday. He had a good start of the season. Then had a real deep. He was dropped for the game against Arsenal. That red card against Bayern Munich that we mentioned earlier. But since mid-December, the game away at Lyon in Ligue 1, the 2 games against Monaco, just unplayable at times. It doesn't have to be goals. It could be assists. It could just be the press, as we said, the pressing on Saturday, his effort, the leadership. He did everything in the last 4.5 months. It's incredible. And in the end, he will finish the season with 45 goals involvement in 49 matches in all competitions. It's incredible. 45 in 49. 33 goals, 12 assists. At 28 years old, the talent was always there. It was just for him to finally find the extra little thing that would take him to another level. And he found that this season. And I'm obviously completely biased, but I'm very happy for him. But I also think he deserves it. He's the best player in the world currently.
Gab, did you let out an audible groan then?
Yes, how can we even have this discussion when the World Cup hasn't even happened yet?
Oh,
you would
God.
never ask this question before the World Cup.
Shut up, Mark Conti. Don't start with your Club World Cup
He's going to have a
nonsense.
chance to do it in the Club World Cup no, I'm kidding. But I do think, though, that it is relevant because I think it could have an impact on what happens. Lamine Yamal obviously won't be there. Voters are a funny bunch of people. And if Paris Saint-Germain do well, if Dembele has a strong World Cup, then he may well win it.
What about you? Shut up.
Shut
what
up.
about you, Nathan?
You're right. It's better. Shut up. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've spoken with Jules about, say, who's going to win Ballon d'Or beforehand. And previously, we'd been talking about Lamine Yamal and so on. So it does feel like there's an element of recency bias here. But he did show up in that game yesterday. So that case is certainly going to be up there. And those stats, they definitely ring true. I think there might have been, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, Jules, but there might have been somewhat of a goal drought in recent weeks for him. But in reality, the change that he's had in the second half of the season has been astonishing to where you have to take note, seeing him play in that position. And as Enrique said, after lifting the Champions League, it's the work rate, it's the attacking and the defending. I think at times we're guilty of just looking at the attacking. But if we're going to talk about somebody who's been complete for their side and really change the narrative about what could be achieved, well, I think Ousmane Dembele had in Paris Saint-Germain lift that Champions League trophy. And for the season that he's had there, it's a tough case to go against, especially when, as you just did then, you put the stats of, say, himself and Lamine Yamal next to each other. Because Lamine Yamal offered so many moments, which we do love. But when you look at just output, that efficiency, he doesn't have it compared to Dembele. So Dembele in this moment, he is the king. And, as I say, recency bias is definitely a thing. And the PSG bias for Jules is also a thing. Mm-hmm. But if they gave it to him, there'd be no concerns from my standpoint.
Right, away from the Champions League final, it was confirmed today, Matheus Cunha is a Manchester United player, making that switch from Wolves. United have triggered that £62.5 million release clause. Is this going to be a success or a failure, Gab?
I think there were better options out there. My unease with Cunha is that, we're going to find out, right? Are they signing him to play behind the striker, or are they signing him to be the center forward? I think with that money, you could have gotten somebody else, like, say, Victor Osimhen, and yes, I'm obsessed with him, but who I think would have really addressed the needs in terms of the center forward position, which I think is more of an issue given you still have Bruno and Amad Diallo there, and is roughly the same age. And unlike Matheus Cunha, does not have a history of ill discipline and getting into rows with opponents and teammates and stuff like that. So, yeah, he may do well, but I don't love this deal.
I want to talk about what's going on at City, Jules, because there's a couple of players that have been linked to that move to Pep Guardiola's side. Shirley being one of them, and this would be an actual player that you've seen, unlike many others, as to whether or not he is a good move for City.
I think at his age, his value is the fee for him, which is around £35 million, a little bit less than that. But the talent that he has, I think, would be a wonderful signing for Manchester City. I think he would fit this team perfectly. And Lyon is not Man City or is not a top Premier League club. I get that. But he had to first do it there, and he did it very much so. He did it in Europe, he did it in the league. And that's why City are there. That's why City are negotiating with his people, who are, by the way, Kylian Mbappe's people too. And there's a reason why other clubs in England, like Liverpool, like Chelsea, Same in the Bundesliga. Bayer Leverkusen's team very much has the potential replacement for Florian Wirtz or Borussia Dortmund or even PSG last summer because he's that talented and that good.
Do you know much about him? Don't know.
I know a lot about him, and I really appreciate the players, and he's a great player, but I think he doesn't fit on the Guardiola system. The guy is, do you remember Atem Ben Arfa?
Yes.
The so much talented midfielder, played for Newcastle, and that's the kind of players where with the ball the guy can do everything. But I don't see him fitting in the Manchester City system, where it's more about passing and blah 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 than turning around and that going forward fast. That's
He's
only
vertical, and Pep is just horizontal all the time.
yeah, but Doku was like that, but he has to come back, you know. And you had Grealish at first coming from Aston Villa,
Ruined him.
and yeah, kind of. And yeah, I don't see. I mean, Czech is a great player, but that's maybe the only team I shouldn't go because of the system, of Guardiola's system.
What about Reinders, Gab?
So, Gianni Reinders has had a tremendous season for Milan. Had a really good year before that as well. You're getting a guy who's perpetual motion machine, who gets goals, who delivers assists, who's unselfish, who works really hard. I think Milan are going to do the deal if they get Tonali type money for it. I think it might also depend on on the situation with the manager as well. But obviously how Max Allegri feels about him, whether that was a condition in him returning to Milan. But I think he would be a tremendous signing for Manchester City in the midfield, which has obviously gotten older with Gundogan and Bernardo Silva and even Rodri not being young anymore and coming off an ACL.
Does this get you excited, Naden?
Well, no, because, with Shirky, he can't play for City because not vertical enough. That's going to be the issue. And then Reinders, it might be a weather issue.
Passive-aggressive,
so many problems.
Isn't it, Frank?
That's a little bit. But I like Reinders. How do you say Reinders? Reinders?
Say it like
Yeah,
you want, that's what I do.
Yeah, I love the players. And he will fit to Manchester City because I don't want people thinking that I don't like or I hate, as you say, Pep Guardiola. I think, Reinders will fit perfectly to Manchester City.
Naden?
No, I'm going to say these are two really good players coming off of exceptional seasons. I think, as Jules has said there about Cherki, it's like the consistency because we've seen the talent, and I think that's when you show real growth as a player, when the consistency starts to shine. And yes, if he does come to Man City, he's obviously going to have an eye on himself and thinking that he can fit in there, and he can learn and develop as a player. He's 21 years of age, and then even looking at Reinders at 26, that's not to an age where you can't sort of adapt and learn new things as well. And I think if City do manage to get him, I think he can continue to improve, continue to grow, and be in a position whereby there is pressure to be winning things every single year. And I think for some of the players that come in at City, they're not always say the biggest names, but from when they come in and they adapt, you look at Akanji, you look at Ake's and people, these guys to go from stride to stride and they start playing some of their best football. So I think if either of those two players come or both, I would not be surprised if they did really well.
Last transfer, Liam Delap to Chelsea. Does that get you excited, Frank?
I am. I don't know what's going to happen. No, I am because we need a striker. We desperately need a striker. We like the Gunners, We need a striker, and he's a great player. Will he fit into it? Hopefully, yes. He had a very good season. But yeah, I'm like Gab. I like Ousmane. I want Ousmane.
Right, to get him instead.
Yeah.
Nadim, Delap obviously from the City Academy.
Yeah, he's done very well. I think seeing him come through the academy, he did really well. And then he obviously had to leave City, spent a little spell on loan in the Championship. And in fairness, I thought he was doing okay. But then when the deal came through for him to go to Ipswich to get a chance to go in the Premier League, I thought, well, let's see how he's going to do. Because it's a lot of money. 20 million is a lot of money for a striker that hasn't really tasted that football before. But in fairness to him, he was the guy who led the line so well for Ipswich to where they felt they had hope through probably the first 2/3 of the season. Obviously, that tailed away at the end, but now you're looking at somebody who's part of the conversation around playing for England. And at the age of 22, there's more to come. I think he's had that taste of it. And yes, the pressure of going to a place like Chelsea where there's an expectation you'll be in the Champions League. You should be going for trophies. That will be fresh to him. But I think he's got the potential to be able to do that. And people are buying into that. And yeah, if he does sign for them, I think personally, in terms of how he'd lead the line, I think he'd do it better than someone like a Nicholas Jackson, who isn't necessarily a 9 as such. So yeah, I would think it could potentially be a good deal for Chelsea, but the pressure certainly will be on him.
Did you want to add something, Gab?
No, I just think imagine how much Frank is gonna troll Natum if Delap turns out to be a success at Chelsea, and you can say, between Delap and Cole Palmer for 70 million, we got two people who end up dominating the Premier League for the next decade. Boy, well done, Pep and Cheeky.
Exactly.
Frank controlled Naden regardless of that, to be honest. To keep up to date with all the latest transfer news, be sure to check out Transfer Talk over on the website as we keep you up to date with everything that's going on throughout the summer. Welcome into the latest edition of Extra Time, a French feel to today's show. Frank is here, and how are you, Frank? How's your?
I'm very good.
Yeah,
and just the two of us today.
Beautiful. Yeah, indeed, just the two of us. But fear not, others are here. Naden joins us, as does Gab. Jules, have you slept at all?
No, not really. No, last night was quite wild. To be fair, after the final, after work, after finding the children.
Beauty.
Yeah.
I won't lie. It felt really good. Thank you, Ned.
Yeah,
it felt really good.
Dan, I have a question because everybody's concerned. I received many phone calls. Did you change your shirt since yesterday, or is it still the same?
No, I slept with it, to be fair.
Oh my God, that's even worse.
With it today. I don't care.
Oh, Gab, you got to stick up with it.
No,
Gab
I'll have
and Jules
another one
podcast.
tomorrow.
An Italian will never do that. An Italian will never do that.
No.
Never.
No, exactly. Gab, maybe you can answer a couple of questions for me. Was there anyone at the stadium who Jules didn't get tickets for yesterday?
Very, very few people, I must say. It's remarkable because when you walked around Munich, I don't know if Jules had the same impression, but obviously the proximity to Milan and whatever felt like maybe it was 65% people in intershirts, and then you get to the Allianz Arena and you run into all of Jules's friends and relatives from back home, from the banlieue, even things out.
Gab, I've been on Champions League final trips with you, and it's all about the meal before. Where was the go-to eatery in Munich for you?
Well, it's funny because for various reasons, I only arrived very late on Friday night, so my pre-match meal necessarily had to be brunch, and I had a very, very nice brunch at a hotel in central Munich with a bunch of people we all know because they're the people who with Thierry Henry. He was there, and Jamie Carragher. Listen to me dropping Mika Richards.
Was Tom Cruise there breaking it down, Gab?
What's that?
Was Tom Cruise there?
Tom Cruise he may have been there, but I did not see him.
There we are.
But no, it was much more an in and out trip to Munich, and you know what? And it wasn't a disappointment. My plane back to London left at 7:20 in the morning. So, like Jules, I also didn't sleep very much, but for very different reasons.
It's not competition, right? Jules, was Mbappe leaving the best thing that's ever happened to PSG?
Well, we talked about it a little bit on the show. I don't know if it's the best thing that happened to them, but certainly, Luis Enrique said when he left that he will make this team better without him, and that's exactly what he did. We will never know what would have happened had he stayed, but we certainly know what happened after he left. And this team is, for me, in 40 years of supporting the club, this is the best PSG team I've seen. I don't know about Frank, but the 90s team was great. The Ginola team and Ryan Weah's team. We had the Ibrahimovic team that was great. Right. The Mbappe team at times was very good. The team in the 80s with Safet Suzic was very good as well. But a team like this, I have not seen one.
Yeah, I have to share the first spot with the Rai, Ginola, Valdo, Ricardo's team in the 90s, because they were absolutely fantastic, and when they won the Europa League with Djorkaeff as well, Bruno and Gauthier scored the goal. They had a very good time there, but that team is impressive, really, because they are young on top of it. They have a future. We can see those players for a decade, and the margin that they still have is huge. So when you win a Champions League, I'm concerned about that. When you win, it was like Thierry Henry, we were talking about him just before, and David Trezeguet winning the World Cup at 20 years old. How do you find it? How do you appreciate it? Is it normal? And for Désiré Doué or for some others like Mayulu scoring, winning the Champions League, how do you receive that? And how do you appreciate it? That's a very good question that I would ask to them and say, is it exceptional for you or is it normal? Because that's tricky. It's too young to appreciate. You don't have the experience to appreciate that, I think.
Gab, Luis Enrique's tactical and philosophical changes are a big part of the PSG story. Is this one of the greatest managerial performances we've ever seen in the modern Champions League?
I think in some ways, in the way he turned, in the way he turned the team around, you could certainly make the case. If your benchmark is, does he leave some sort of massive legacy? If everybody's going to now start copying Luis Enrique the way people tried to emulate Pep Guardiola back in or Arrigo Sacchi back in the day and whatnot. I don't think so. I think there's a certain environment at Paris Saint-Germain. I think Luis Enrique has a very specific skill set. I don't think somebody else can say, oh, look, let me study Paris Saint-Germain and their success and let me emulate this somewhere else. So if legacy or transportability to another context is part of your benchmark, then probably not. If winning over critics and through trial and error, through hard work, through charisma, and going ahead and beating Real Madrid and Arsenal and then Inter in one of the most one-sided finals ever, while also winning 2 other domestic trophies, while also having a shot at making a quadruple the Club World Cup, then he's certainly on his way.
Nedum, good evening.
Good evening.
Wirtz for 130 million or Cherki and Reinders for 105 million?
Cherki and Reinders for me.
Yeah, what a surprise.
I think obviously Florian Wirtz.
Because Florian Wirtz turned you down.
But well, I don't know about that. Wirtz is obviously a very, very good player, but I think if you get 2 for a similar sort of price, who could have that sort of potential, then you absolutely go for it, especially with Cherki being 21 years of age. That's a huge talent, and who's to say that in the future he can't be seen in the same way as a Florian Wirtz is right now? So I think I'd go for those 2, but to be talking about those 3 players itself is always good to have those sorts of options on the table.
Wow.
He's going to be a politician, mate.
Oh, yeah, he's very
100%
good. Very good.
One day. He'll be there. Gab, the Inter Milan squad is overdue for an overhaul. How many of Inter's starting 11 from yesterday do you think is going to be there next season?
Ooh, good question. So they all have contracts, and the old ones, as people know, when you're old and you make a lot of money, it's hard for you to move on. So I think if the question is how many of them are going to be starting for a successful Inter team next season, I would assume they're going to move on from Mkhitaryan, definitely. I think Çalhanoğlu's got another shot. Barella's got another shot. Acerbi, I would imagine, it's time for him to sort of fade into the background a little bit. Jan Sommer, I think they're gonna keep around. I mean, they like Joseph Martinez. There's they're obviously negotiating Sommer's extension. That's the big one. And then obviously Lautaro and Marcus Thuram, those guys are gonna be back. So guys, we can talk about how old this Inter team, and yes, they were the oldest team by weighted minutes in the big 5 European leagues, blah, blah, blah. Let's also realize, though, that Jan Sommer, Mkhitaryan, and Acerbi raised the average age tremendously because those guys are actually really, really, really old. In terms of over 30s next season, if you take those 3 guys out, and I think it's really only going to be Çalhanoğlu in case or maybe Benjamin Pavard, but of course they have Jan Bissek for that position as well. So,
right, 6. 6 out of 11.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
No, people are
I'm not really convinced.
I find people since yesterday, very harsh on Inter Milan. I mean,
They lost 5-0 in a final.
Yes,
biggest
the
margin
ending,
in the
I know
football
the
ever.
ending is important. In so many occasions, the ending is important. But in football, you have to see the whole season. I mean, they've been runner-up to every competition they've been on. It's not good because, like Arsenal, you win nothing. But I think you have to give credit to that team and what they've achieved this season. They've been good this season. And we keep,
How many
the
times have you
finals.
seen Inter Milan play this season?
No, I saw them playing a lot in Champions League, for example, and in the calcio. But really, you have to be a little bit more respectful towards what they've done.
Who do?
Me, I respect that, and Gab, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think to be honest, everybody out there who has a bigger wage bill or comparable wage bill to Inter, and who watched this final on television. You want me to name names? Tottenham Hotspur, Manchester United, Arsenal, Real Madrid,
exactly.
Barcelona. Hey, how did you guys enjoy the final? How did you do against Paris Saint-Germain?
Oh,
I know. You either lost to Paris Saint-Germain or you didn't get to play in the final.
I have another guy.
So put some respect on Inter's name.
Thank you very much, Gab. Thank you very much. It's like the Hawaiian pizza, it's forbidden in Italy.
Right.
Respect has to be strong for Inter Milan. It's nothing to do, but whatever.
that
I just wanted to
analogy
put
didn't work.
I just wanted to put the Hawaiian pizza. That's disgusting.
Do you have Hawaiian pizza?
Never. It's like Gab. You don't do that. You don't go to restaurants with shorts and you don't eat Hawaiian pizza. That's a disgrace for
I'm going to
Italy.
do both tomorrow. I'm going to bring the Hawaiian pizza and shorts with me.
You might get the
Wherever we
pizza on your face.
Nathan, which team are you most excited about next season? Barcelona, PSG or Real Madrid?
I think I'll go PSG, I think for Real Madrid, obviously going with a new manager is going to be exciting. Xabi Alonso, what style of football is he going to have them play?
You're not going to watch League One though, are you? You're going to watch them in the league, are you? You won't be that excited, Nathan.
No, but I am excited to see how they perform as reigning champions, because for them to try and regain their title again, the team's going to play them in a different way. They've been the hungry dog for such a long time, but now everybody's going to be going for you. For the level of performance by those teams is going to be different now. So I think given the praise that Luis Enrique has gotten, he rightly deserves, and the praise that the players have deserved, well, let's see, can they progress again? Or is it going to be a case of the pressure's maybe a bit different now? So I think I'm looking forward to seeing them. And for Barca, they're a great young side, and I think they'll do what they do, and they'll be exciting. Lamine Yamal, one of the best players in the world. But I think the PSG collective is something that probably suits my taste probably a bit more than the other two.
The correct answer is, of course, Real Madrid and Barcelona live and exclusive on ESPN+.
That's true. You can follow them. Yeah, no. Did he say Lamine Yamal is the best player in the world? Is what he said
Yes.
that?
No, I don't think he did. No.
You say
No.
that? No,
No.
you didn't say that?
No.
I heard
No.
that. And I want to know,
I said
what it
no.
means,
No.
because during the
No.
show, Jules say Ousmane Dembele is the best player in the world right now. No, it doesn't mean anything. I don't understand
Why?
those.
How do we... Look, I've ignored you all day on this.
Yeah, no, because I have the tendency to get upset,
You can't be here every day taking this stand.
No, it's just,
bringing it down.
how you compare a goalkeeper with a striker is what I
Nobody-
mean. Doesn't mean anything.
We weren't going to get you involved in this conversation.
Okay,
That was it. You've
okay,
just thrown yourself... You're
No,
like Burley's here. Can't help yourself.
Okay, that's right.
Right, that is it. Thank you very much, everyone. Congratulations, Jules. Of course, more from Jules tomorrow. Maybe wash that T-shirt before the
maybe.
podcast. ESPN FC returns tomorrow. Me and Frank and Ali will be here.
Yes, Ali's back.
Ali's
He
back.
needed a day off from me.
Well, don't we all?